We're very pleased to welcome Sherry Coman as our moderator for today's event. Sherry is a writer, educator, and story editor. She collaborates with a range of writers and artists and has, for over 30 years, been working in theater and film. Sherry has a master's degree in theology and biblical studies from Waterloo Lutheran Seminary and Regis College at the University of Toronto. She teaches film, visual culture, and new media culture at Humber College, as well as film and theology at the University of Toronto and Waterloo Lutheran Seminary. Sherry has been tireless in her efforts to bring together today's panel. We'd like to thank her for all of the hard work that she's put in, pulling a very diverse and thoughtful set of films, as well as welcoming such talented filmmakers here to speak about their work. To tell you more about today's program, please welcome Sherry Coman.
Good afternoon. I have a little bit of a cold, but hopefully it won't be too bad. It's such a tremendous pleasure to be here today. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm so grateful to TIFF, to the higher learning and the adult learning teams, but particularly to Keith Benny and to Jessica Lamb, who have just been the most amazing conversation partners over the past year that we've spent talking about this and coming toward this day. This program was inspired in part by the work I do as a teacher of film and media and a teacher of theology and film in 3 different colleges, as you heard. Over the years, I have often had the chance to work with theology students who are fascinated by film and are keen to have another language for how to talk about it. Similarly, I have worked with film students who are dealing with issues of spiritual and cultural identity in their work and are sometimes a bit nervous about that, uncertain how it will be heard or understood. I began to wonder whether it might be possible to bring these worlds together, to talk to each other and to learn from each other. So here we are. What is spiritual and cultural identity? Perhaps it can be expressed as a deep yearning or desire to be authentic to the self or one's community, while also fully belonging to the world. In too many places, there is something broken in that connection. Communities go unrecognized or without freedoms. They are living in parts of the world that do not feel like home, while the yearning for home continues to burn within them. There are individuals and groups who have been denied even the most basic of human rights, or those rights have come at a very painful cost to their ancestors. In the spirit of TIFF's mantra, transforming the way people see the world through film, these 6 films and 7 filmmakers have found a vision that expresses something profound about the way they see the world, and which is also deeply rooted in their spiritual and/or cultural identity. They are inviting us to enter in, to walk with them, through the streets of Kabul, Afghanistan, over the art-filled overpasses of Montreal, down Dundas Street in the 1960s, among the community gatherings and uprisings of Tibetan Toronto, and with the struggles of the LGBT community in the church, and into the imagination and deeply hopeful restorative voice of our native peoples. Indeed, the first world we are going to enter into is that of Kevin Papatie's Kokam. This beautiful tribute to Kevin's Anishinaabe grandmother was shown at the Toronto International Film Festival last September and was also screened at the Indigenous Peoples Film Festival in Finland and at the International Documentary Film Festival in Mexico City. Unfortunately, Kevin was not able to join us today, but he asked that we please show the film. He very much wants you to see it, and we're grateful for that. Patrice Laliberté's Overpass, or Viaduc, will follow. Overpass won the Shortcuts Award for Best Canadian Short Film at TIFF 15 and was included at TIFF's Canada's Top 10 for Shorts for 2015. He was here just 2 weeks ago to participate in that, so we're very grateful that he's back with us today. Sofia Bohdanowicz and Joanna Durkalec's Dundas Street is based on the poetry of Sophia's Polish great-grandmother. The film has been screened internationally in Poland, Germany, Lithuania, and London, England, and even here at the Lightbox in an event sponsored by the Polish consulate. The filmmakers will be represented on the panel today by Sofia Bohdanowicz. Alex Fensham's God is Love was made as a third-year documentary project at Humber College's Film and Media Studies program. Both a director and cinematographer, Alex has also been active in working for fuller inclusion in the LGBT people, for LGBT people in the Presbyterian Church. Singing in Diaspora, directed by Sabchu Rinpoché, is also a third-year documentary project of Humber College's Film and Media Studies program. Born and raised in Nepal, Sabchu is a Buddhist philosopher and an active member of the Tibetan community in Toronto. Finally, we are excited to be presenting a clip from the feature film Mina Walking, directed by Yosef Baraki. This film debuted at the Berlin International Film Festival almost exactly a year ago and has since been circling the globe, gathering awards and honors at more than 20 international film festivals. Shot entirely in Kabul, Afghanistan, with local actors. Just 2 weeks ago at the Canadian Screen Awards nominations, it was named as the first ever recipient of the Discovery Award. So it's a pretty amazing lineup we have today. We are going to run the films and go directly to the panel without a break in order to maximize the time we have available. Thank you very much. Enjoy, and see you soon. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are our filmmakers. And I just want to reconnect the filmmaker with the film so that you know who is talking about what. As I mentioned earlier, Kevin Papatie, who directed Kokam, could not be here. That was the very first film you saw, the Anishinaabe film. After that, we saw, and I'm just going to ask you to wait till I'm through all the introductions if there's any recognition you want to show. The very far end, I have Patrice Laliberté, who is the director of Overpass, and his translator is Violaine today. Next to him is Yosef Baraki, who directed the last thing we saw, which is the clip from the feature film Mina Walking. Excuse me. Next to him is Sofia Bohdanowicz, who is one of the two directors of Dundas Street. Joanna Durkalec is also here. Next to her is Sabchu Rinpoché, who is the director of Singing in Diaspora. And here is Alex Fensham, the director of God is Love. So we thought we would start. I thought I would start by asking each of the filmmakers to just briefly describe what was the inspiration of the film. So I'll start with you, Patrice.
Hello? Yeah, cool. L'inspiration première de mon film, c'est vraiment, je suis parti de mon adolescence, puis en fait, il y a un truc aussi que dans mon parcours, je suis toujours un peu fasciné par la mort. Il y a quelque chose qui, en fait, je pense que ça nous fascine tous. Et durant l'université, je devais parcourir 25 km de voiture entre le lieu où est-ce que j'étais et l'université. Et à chaque fois où est-ce que je rencontre, en fait, régulièrement, je voyais les espèces de croix sur le bord de la route, plantées par quelqu'un qui était en deuil et qui a voulu commémorer une personne décédée dans le cas d'un accident de la route. Puis pour moi, ça me fascinait ce genre de rituel-là, qui n'est pas un rituel religieux, qui est un rituel très personnel, mais en même temps qui l'est religieux. Mais et j'avais le goût de le traduire vers un personnage adolescent. Et en fait, c'est ça.
Well, actually, yes. Actually, for the inspiration of the movie, I really draw a lot into my adolescence. And during this adolescence, I'm always, there's a little thing that's important is during this journey, I was always fascinated by death. And I think we're all fascinated by death. Also, during my teenage years, I had to travel regularly, these 25 kilometers between my house and the university. That's the trip I was doing regularly. And then each time I would notice these crosses that had been planted by someone, and I would always remember these crosses. It was a sign of remembrance of someone who had passed during a car crash, and I became very fascinated by that ritual that's at the same time a personal ritual and also a religious ritual. So it's about these crosses. So I was really fascinated by this.
Yosef.
I was inspired to do this film in many different ways, but mainly I really wanted to explore the culture. And being someone who really enjoys watching the process of things being done, I had this image burned into my head of very slowly this girl preparing a funeral. And I thought that having visited Afghanistan many times, I wanted to find an in to the culture, a way that I could explore, a vessel through which I could explore the culture. And the street children in Afghanistan seem to be just that, because they're children and they're on the street. They have access to all the areas in Afghan culture. So that, coupled with that image of the process of funeral being prepared, really sparked the initial inspiration.
Sophia.
So for Dundas Street, the inspiration was my great-grandmother, Sofia, who I am named after. And I always knew that she was a poet, that she had published several books, but I had never read any of her poetry. So one day I decided to Google her name and see what popped up. And then on Google, on I think this Wikipedia Canada website, her poem came up. And I couldn't believe it, and I was reading it, and I knew that she had written the poem in the 1960s. That's when she wrote Dundas Street. She, during World War II, she fled Poland, so she lived throughout Europe and then North Africa. And then her only son, when they were settled in Wales, and she really loved the nature and the landscape there, they came to Toronto in the 1960s. So she wrote a series of poems about feeling displaced in the city. And Dundas Street was the first piece that I came across, and as soon as I read it, I just started to identify with it in a very strong visual way, and I knew that I wanted to make a film about it and explore my family's history a little bit more. Unfortunately, I don't speak Polish, so that's where Joanna came in. One day she sent me this email. It was shortly after I discovered the poem, and it was kind of serendipitous. The timing was really great. And she said, I've always really wanted to work in film, because Joanna works in design and advertising. And she was like, if you ever need my help, feel free to get in touch. And I wrote back to her and I was like, yeah, I need your help. I have this great poem. It is translated into English. There's a lot of nuance in the Polish language that I don't want to miss out on. Would you be interested in co-directing this project? So I was very lucky that she came on board, and the rest is history.
Sabchu.
Thank you, Sherry. I see lots of familiar faces here from Tibetan community and diaspora, especially based in Toronto. So I want to quickly say thank you so much for coming and taking part in this. My inspiration for the film, I've always struggled with identity. I have my religious identity, I have my cultural identity, I have my ethnic identity, and and growing up, learning philosophy, and then later on teaching philosophy, I've really lost the distinction between philosophy as a conceptual idea versus philosophy as a mental attitude. And so on the one hand, I feel like all these identities are very conditional based, they're very relative, they don't really have their inherent sort of existence objectively, it's very relational. But on the other hand, there are so many things that are based on identities, that are fought for identity. So it's a struggle that I have personally. And then when I saw and met Lagya and many other Tibetans like her, that is something that I feel very intrigued, seeing, how a person can be so passionate and determined, and spend so much energy on a cause, And so I wanted to explore not just for a narrative reason, but also for my personal sort of sake, like how is this, how can she have that determination when I have some trouble with? So it has twofold reasons.
Wonderful, thank you. Is Lagia here today?
Yes, she
Yeah.
is.
Okay, wonderful, thank you, so glad. Alex?
I grew up in the Presbyterian Church. My dad was a Presbyterian minister, and he's now a professor at Knox College at U of T, which is the Presbyterian Seminary here in Toronto. So I grew up as a preacher's kid, a PK, and it was a community that I always had seen from the inside and had just kind of taken for granted as my community, my faith community. And so when the church started struggling with this issue of LGBTQ inclusion, acceptance, and all of this, it was an opportunity for me to start critically looking at that community and seeing how the church was handling that conflict. And when I had an opportunity to make a documentary film, of course, this was the story that I wanted to tell. And I think the real thing that really hooked me about exploring this is the idea that both religion and spirituality and sexuality and orientation are both such deeply personal things that people have within them. And when they come into conflict, it can be so powerful when those two things come into conflict. And that was really what I wanted to explore, and that's how I set out on this journey.
Thank you, all of you. So I am wondering, how much does your spiritual and or cultural identity, I think some of this has actually been answered already, but if you have anything to add, inform generally how you work as an artist? So maybe we'll start at this end this time. Alex?
I mean, any time you take on an artistic endeavor, it comes from within you. And I mean, for this particular documentary, of course, my personal paradigm and my view and my connections within the church were very important and really helped drive the access I had and what I was able to tell. If you're asking in general as an artist how it informs you, I think we just need to be aware of our own lens and our own point of view and our own bias, and aware of our cultural experience, our identity, and our spirituality. And that will always inform work inherently. And I think that it's the degree to which you consciously recognize that influence, that's how it influences your work. And so I find that with myself that, I mean, being a white middle-class Canadian seems like a boring paradigm, but it actually, when you become aware of it, it actually does inform a lot of what my life is and how I view everything that comes at me. And as I get older and as I continue exploring my art, that's something I become more and more critical of, is that particular paradigm I have, and I think that's always important.
I agree with Alex, especially, you know, when in my context, being Tibetan myself, I knew a lot of the issue with the community that we are facing outside of mainland Tibet and in diaspora. But at the same time, there were certain personal things, like I was mentioning earlier. It's very I don't know, like a very mental attitude that I have had for quite some time, and then whenever I see something that is in contrast to that, it just brings up an idea: how what is this? Who is this? You know, we tend to do that quite a lot whenever we encounter or see something that you want to relate to, that you find alien, but at the same time very relatable. It's very intriguing. So my the journey of making this documentary was less about narrative, but more about you know, how am I relating to this, and why am I relating to this? A lot of that, and I think it really comes from my philosophical background. You know, learning more about philosophy, and later on, just being cognizant of, you know, my own thought as I'm thinking about, you know, these things when I'm shooting.
Wonderful, thank you. It's very interesting, the idea of knowing your own identity, sort of by recognizing what isn't you, It's part of how you form who you are. Yes, Sophia.
Yeah, I think I would echo that forming your identity is about like identifying like what is a part of you, what you feel close to and what isn't. And I think that in making Dundas Street, I think that was informed a lot by mine and Joanna's family's history. Joanna's parents came to Canada in the 1980s to escape communist Poland. So they were able to find community and strength and grounding and refuge in the Catholic Church. And my family is very Catholic as well. And my grandmother and great aunt and great uncle were deported in World War II to camps in Siberia, and everything was taken away from them, and all they had was their faith and religion and devotion. And while I don't subscribe to the Catholic faith, I have a very strong appreciation and gratitude and understanding from where they're coming from. And it's that strength and spirituality that has actually been able to help me really form as an artist. And I feel really privileged to be in a position where I am able to live in a place where I can practice like what makes me feel good and strong. And I learned all of that devotion and how to work intuitively and with what feels good by observing my family and their devotion to their own faith.
Mina Walking is a movie about a girl that's trying to keep her family together, a fragmented family, and she's a child and she needs to grow up in order to try to save her family and keep them together, and as a result she kind of gives up her childhood. For me, I think the story has been informed by my background in that I grew up with two different religions in my home. My father practices Islam. My mother practices Catholicism. And both are very strong, and so I grew up in that environment. And so more than anything, I got to experience both spectrums, and it really kind of gave me perspective that charity and love and fraternity is really the result of transcendence through sacrifice. And so Mina Walking is more than anything a movie about sacrifice.
Pour ma part, je pense que mon identité culturelle est venue influencer l'œuvre. En fait, je pense que comme créateur, c'est important de toujours partir d'où, en fait, de nous-mêmes. Je pense que le plus qu'on est local, le plus qu'on peut vraiment avoir un discours un peu universel. Dans le cas de Viaduc, c'est pas une histoire qui m'est arrivée, mais c'est une histoire qui est très, très, très inspirée par ma famille. En fait, tous les personnages que vous voyez, c'est vraiment ma famille. En fait, c'est vraiment la mère et la relation qu'elle a avec son fils. Toute l'idée des portes, mais en fait, moi, je fermais jamais mes portes quand j'étais jeune. Puis, en fait, c'est vraiment, je pense que c'est de là, je pense que plus qu'on est honnête, plus que facilement notre message peut parcourir, peut travel, peut voyager en fait. Je pense que c'est ça, je pense que c'est important d'être honnête quand on crée, de prendre une partie de soi-même puis de la mettre et de l'exposer aux gens. Donc, c'est ça.
I feel as a creator, as a director, I need to be the most honest and concrete. So therefore, as for me, the inspiration just comes from my culture and my own spiritual identity. I need to start from myself as a creative person. And I think it's very important, the more local we are and the more we come from ourselves with a universal message, that's how we come across. We can bring our message across the most. This history has not happened to me really, but it's my whole family, my real family is represented in that movie, and I feel really close to the history. Also, when you see the relationship between the son and the mother, it's very close to my own family and my own relationship. When I was young, I would never shut the doors. So I really feel that if we want to come across and really bring a strong message and to have our message to travel, we really need to start coming from ourselves, because it's when I come from myself that I will be the most honest and therefore be the most understood.
So I'm hearing that the self as artist is the starting point. That's great. Thank you. I'm just wondering, what were some of the challenges to the making of this particular film, either personally or technically or in terms of the content? Why don't we start in the middle this time? I'll start with Sophia.
Okay. I think one challenge, there were so many. One of them was budget. Shooting on the street without permits. That's a lot of fun, especially when you get stopped by the cops. There's a scene actually that we were supposed to film on the street, but we moved it into the alleyway. It's a scene where the woman is walking in the alleyway and a young girl reaches out to her. We moved to an alleyway because we were stopped by a cop, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, we're Ryerson students," which we weren't. And he was like, "You should know that you shouldn't be doing this." And then we moved everything to an alleyway. So, working without a budget is always really difficult. It being a self-funded project is really difficult. Asking a lot of people for a lot of favors. So going into the neighborhood of Dundas and Runnymede and asking people, "Can we film in your store? Do you mind?" And the amount of openness and trust that we received in return was just outstanding. Another hard aspect was casting, making sure that it looked and felt real and authentic. And we were having a hard time casting the role of Cornelius. It's really hard to find good, strong, elderly actors. So Joanna and I really wanted someone who felt authentic. So we went actually to the church that Sofia references in her poem in the Dundas and Runnymede area, and we went to church and we were kind of looking around, seeing if we would see someone that would, fit the role for us. And there's a very strong Maltese community there. So after church, we were looking around and we were like, okay, where's everyone going? And they went to the Maltese bake shop, and we were sitting there and we're eating and we're sipping our tea. And this woman came up to us and she said, "What are you doing here? What do you want?" So we kind of explained, we're looking for a man to play the role of this Maltese fruit merchant in a film. Do you know anyone who might be interested? And then someone piped up, "Why, yes, there's Paul Tanti. He played the donkey in the Easter parade." So then they all took us over to this Maltese Legion. They introduced us to Paul Tanti. He was a very open and interested person. He liked the script. We got along really well. So we decided to give it a roll. But, despite all the difficulties we had a lot of serendipitous happenings. And this was one of many.
Great, thank you. Patrice.
Technically, the first scene was the most difficult thing in the project. And I was speaking English. Oh, sorry. Well, it's revealing. And I'm gonna switch for French. And pour le contenu, en fait, le plus difficile, c'était d'être subtil, de pas être trop, de pas prendre pour un ou l'autre parti. Il y a un message politique qui est derrière ça au sujet de l'intervention militaire, puis les impacts que ça a sur les familles. Et j'avais pas envie de faire un truc qui était très pamphlétaire. J'avais envie de faire un truc d'un côté ou de l'autre, où est-ce qu'on se place, si on est pour ou contre l'armée, on va voir quelque chose de positif. Je pense que les gens de l'armée voient ce sacrifice-là comme étant quelque chose que, positif non, mais nécessaire. Donc, c'est vraiment ces deux aspects-là le plus difficile qui ont été faits. La première scène plus technique avec le cinéma, puis le contenu ensuite de comment bien raconter l'histoire de manière à ce qu'on ne tombe pas dans des clichés ou ouais.
So there were actually two difficulties for me. There was one technical difficulty I spoke about earlier, and the other one was regarding the content in which we you did not want to tell a story and just fall in a prejudicial thoughts too much. So as for the content, I found it was the most difficult because I wanted to relate the story in a subtle manner by staying impartial. That means I did not want to take any sides. Behind the story is obviously a political message, and the events, the action into Afghanistan, and the impact which is on the families. So I did not want to force you to place yourself on one or the other side. And as for the people in the army, for example, I don't know what they relate, but for them, these sacrifices is probably viewed as more positive. So that was the difficulty for me at the content, is to say things in a subtle manner so I could just navigate between these two sides, and the technical side as well, as you mentioned earlier.
Oh, that's interesting. Alex.
Well, with all filmmaking, it was an uphill battle all the way. But I think I would break it down into three main challenges. The first being the how to tackle bias and the issue of bias. I have an extreme personal bias towards what I believe on this issue. And when we first set out, my creative team and I, when we first set out to make this documentary, we were talking a lot about, let's get both sides of this story. Let's be very neutral with our bias going into it. And a moment that was very important was the moment when I realized that my bias is a strength, and to have a documentary film, you need to have bias, and you need to know what your point of view is on something. And as a filmmaker, you need to bring that through. And the moment that I realized that was actually a strength, and that I didn't actually have an obligation to make something that's journalistic, but rather that's something that's a film that tells a story, that was a really important moment. And I think that was the biggest single lesson as an artist that I learned from making the documentary. Another major challenge was finding a subject who was compelling. And the first time that I talked to Sue on the phone was probably the most amazing day of the whole process, because I realized that this was somebody who was both articulate but also inspiring, and somebody who you could relate to and just love instantly, but who also could bring a very articulate and nuanced point of view to the film. And her graciousness in allowing us to both speak to her about the issue broadly in the church and what they're doing, but also to use her personal story and her relationship and her love story was a very, very powerful moment. And I'm so grateful to her, and to have that piece fall into place was a challenge to find that one person that could represent this issue in a way that we could explore the issues of the church and of the structures and of the scripture and all of that, but around a personal story. So that was a great thing to fall into place. And the last issue, or last category, was compositionally, how to put this all together. And we had a very challenging time in the edit trying to weave this together in a way that it was both a story but also could explore all these really difficult to understand concepts and these vast spiritual concepts, but also the scripture and the doctrine and the church structures and all of that all in one thing that could flow together. And I really have to credit my editor, Chris Rugo, for bringing such a unique perspective to it and really helping lay out. And I remember one particular night where we were like, okay, the structure's not working, and we had all the transcripts of all our interviews. We printed them all out, and we sat in the edit suite, all of us, and we just cut them out, and we're faced them together, and we, on the floor, we had this massive long thing that just wrote down of how we thought that the film could go, and we looked at that, and that was a really important moment. I really need to credit the other people I worked with on this, my editor, my Lee Sabina, my producer who's here, Lee, my sound person, my editor, Chris Rugo. Those people really helped navigate through all those really difficult stages of the project.
And speaking of Sue, your subject is Sue here today?
No, she couldn't make it today. She sends her
Okay.
regrets that she wasn't able to make it,
That's
but
okay.
she was,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I wasn't sure. Okay, great. Sabchu.
Yeah. Just on a general note, I've because I've been exposed to different cultures, and I'm quite multicultural in that sense. I'm very happy to see how supportive Canada government is, and with the city and people like yourself and TIFF to give so much support to student filmmakers and indie filmmakers, which sort of gives me a little bit sense of sort of courage to continue on in this career in this profession. In terms of challenges, well, I think my challenge in particular, what Alex mentioned earlier about being biased and challenges to stay critical in your project. I think that because, like I said earlier, being just very critical, too critical on something that you actually not taking side, that I find that again challenging, not being biased. So I, this was we shot like 5 days altogether, and then when I started the interview, I felt that Laja, as she responding to my questions, there were a lot of things that she was withholding. And I can see that it's partly because I'm a Tibetan and I understand what she's saying. So there is this subconsciously, she's restraining, thinking, oh, okay, this part, he knows that, and he knows this, he knows that. So, she's not, I want to elicit those responses, but I have challenges. So instead, I had to come up with a tactic. So I asked my producer, who's I think here, Roya, and I appointed her so she could do that, and to get those responses, and it worked really well. So that was a challenge. The other challenge was to sort of now fit it together and stringing it out, and within a 15 minutes short documentary, and that to say what you have to say in that time period. That I find that a great challenge. But again, my editor Samantha, she was a great help. Nights and nights of editing. So I really have to again thank her for that. Yeah, I think that's it.
And I've just been had the sign that we only have a few minutes, so I'm glad that Yosef will now finish this part of the program, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A.
So making a film in a country that's experiencing war is almost like an exercise in using limitations. And I found that those limitations are actually what solved many of the challenges, both content and technically. The fact that I didn't have the kind of budget to bring all sorts of equipment and production crew to Afghanistan, that was a limitation. But at the end of the day, that helped me blend into the environment on the streets of Kabul, using a small camera, no lighting, a crew of maybe 5 or 6 people, wearing local attire, and really just trying to blend into the environment, not to be seen, was almost a blessing in disguise that I didn't have those resources, because that's what made the movie possible. On the content side, one of the more bigger challenges was how not to fall into a stereotype when telling a story in a country that you're not currently living in. And so the limitation that really saved my life on this was the fact that I only had 19 days to film this movie without breaks. And so the fact that I just kept going and I was just shooting every day for 19 days for 17 hours a day without any breaks or weekends really kind of was a limitation that made me not question anything, not put anything that wasn't necessary, and just the limitation that I set for myself, which was just focus on the girl and never let her leave the frame, was a limitation that really helped focus the story and not make it a stereotype.
That's terrific. Thank you. I appreciate all these thoughts and from the filmmakers, and I now would like to open it up to those of you out there who may have questions for them. And the way this is going to work is that there are 2 people with microphones on either side, and I'd ask that you wait until the microphone's been passed to you before asking the question, and I will repeat it for clarity, and our filmmakers will answer. And you can address it to all of them and randomly, or you can address it to an individual in particular. But we'd love to hear from you. They're very excited about this part of today.
Yeah.
They told me that earlier. It's like, yeah, that Q&A, I can't wait. So do we have anyone who would like to? Oh, sorry. Oh, you're going to have a light. Okay, thank you.
That was cool. Okay, hi. I'm a young actor who's just really into filmmaking and learning all about it. In each of the films, it's like pretty like dour issues, it seems, or like there's a lot of darkness, like there's some death, obviously, too, in a lot of them. What was it like articulating the hope in the films? Like, where did you put your focus, and how important was it in articulating that kind of stuff?
So the question then again, I think you heard it, but is to ask the filmmakers generally how they were able to find a way to articulate hope in the midst of stories that have a lot of darkness. There is actually a common theme of grieving in all of these films. So who would like to start? Alex wants to start.
I love that. I love that question, because to me, the moment for me that everything started to click of how I figured I could tell the story was to not tell the story of struggle, of that, but of hope, of Sue's hope that things will get better, of the hope that change can happen, and it's slow and it's hard and it's terrible, but change can happen. And I think that by looking at it through that lens and not through the lens of all the obstacles, but rather of the people who are trying to overcome those obstacles, it really focused in on this massive issue and this complex issue for me, and allowed me to find a way through that, which was very helpful. So hope was probably the most important discovery of mine within this issue when making this film.
Anyone else?
I think, I think that's such a great question, because it's so easy just to kind of slip into the darkness and not add some lightness into your practice. And I think like one thing that helped like add glimpses of hope into Sophia's perspective of Dundas Street was actually my dad checking in with me when I was telling him about the film. And he said, you know, Sophia's poetry is very serious. It is very heavy. It's very complex. Like my grandmother always said that, Sophia always said, so my grandmother's mother-in-law said, you can't transplant a mature tree. And it's so hard for someone who's, you know, spent their time growing up in one country and moving to another and trying to find hope there. And the thing with Toronto was that it just wasn't a good climate for her. She always lived in the countryside, so she wasn't used to an urban landscape. And my father reminded me when we were making the film, you know, like she was a very serious woman, but she had like a lightness to her. She had like a really good sense of humor. And I actually have her cigarette case that I always carry around with me. And inside of it is inscribed, therefore we shall smoke. So it's like, you know, she did have a very serious side, but reminding myself too that she was a person with all different kinds of personality traits and facets, and that it just like wasn't completely one-sided really helped me along. So I have my dad to thank for that.
Okay, Sabchu. I can see.
My sort of prior to the principal of photography, when we sat down, we, my editor and all my friends, we really wanted to make sure that the film doesn't come out as propagandic film or anything of that nature. We planned it out to make it a character piece, a character-driven film, and being in diaspora, there are a lot of issues that we have, but at the same time, we also there are, we party together. There are celebrations. It's life. It's very colorful. So we wanted to sort of capture the entire spectrum of that, which is why the way a film ends, Ladja saying that we should celebrate time to time. I thought that was a very important part of that diaspora community, which she belongs to. So, yeah.
So there's hope there. Good. Okay, we have another question. Sorry. There's the light. Okay, thank you.
Hello. I'm very interested in the themes that might be drawn between all 6 films, and so I'd be interested in hearing what you saw, the interplay between the films, the connections you made between your film and your neighbor's film. I mean, it is interesting that Sophia's film has, you know, 2 words: Canada, bad. Her neighbor's film has Tibetan children singing "O Canada," which is very interesting contrast. But the thing that struck me as a possible theme that holds it all together is identity and memory and home. Our very first film, the Anishinaabe film, is about the loss of memory and loss of identity and the regaining of home. And Patrice's film, you know, you think as you're watching it that this is, you know, a pissed off suburban kid, and then you find out at the end there's something much more profound going on here. But the struggle of home there, Mina trying to keep her home together by doing the honorable thing to bring her father back and bury her grandfather. The identity of home for Sophia's grandmother and what Dundas Street meant to her. Tibetan folks who are here, but they're not home here, and they have no home to return to. And then Alex's film is also, I think, about home. It's a question of if your fundamental spiritual home is this church, are you still at home there? So that's just a thought, and I'm wondering if you might respond to that.
And so I'm not going to recapitulate that, but I appreciate it very much. And I'm just going to say that I think we're being asked to comment on overlapping themes.
I think there's a common thread of longing for freedom and for love in these works, and the challenge of not being able to experience those things.
Home and family, but I think is really affiliated.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I think, to me, I think you're exactly right about home, and I would extend that also to the sense of community, and how people identify with the community, but also with then the personal within the community. And I think I saw elements of that in every single film, of how do I relate what I'm experiencing and my point of view with my community, and when do those things align and when do those things not align. And I think that's a very common thread that I saw today throughout all the films.
I think it's more to me, when I saw all the films, it's more sort of identity and the process of identification, how we come to sort of different identities, you know, after experiencing different circumstances and conditions we go through, and how we conceive ourselves with. And a lot of the films, all the films actually, all the characters, the way they see themselves, it's very much related to that. That's how I conceived it.
It's funny because, you know, when I was gathering these films, and I looked at so much material, I thought I had a sort of general idea of what it was that I was looking for, and then something would come up and I would think, oh, can I really use that? Does it fit the criteria? But I have to use it. And then it slowly emerged that there was this tremendous amount of common ground going on in the films, and so it ended up revealing itself. Good. Yes, we have one over there.
My question is mainly for the producer of the Tibetan film, because I am very much inspired by the Tibetan culture and the struggle of the Tibetan people. And I understand that they're very peaceful in the way they react. It's not very aggressive. Every day, like Tibetan burns himself in front of the Chinese, government or parliament, whatever it is in China, to try and get that media attention which is not given to them, which they deserve. to try and like make the world aware of the problems in going on in Tibet, which has been ignored by the media. Like we have, videos about something going wrong, someone eating damaged hot dog and dying, but no one's paying attention to like the people who are not like allowed to practice their own culture, be free in their own country, have that independence. So I was wondering, that if your film is like also part of like your motive was maybe part of the peaceful protest or contribution towards the peaceful protest towards educating the people about like Tibet and like what's going on in that country, like what's going on in that country right now.
Did everyone hear that, I think? Yes, okay.
I knew that this would be part of the film. It's inevitable. But as my friends and when we sat down, we really wanted to make sure that it's not politically driven, it's. We really want to make sure that it's a character-driven film. So, Lagya, our subject, the struggles, Tibetan struggle in general, is something that she has strong feelings for, and she advocates that very strongly. And that being part of her life, we had to capture that. That was very important part. We couldn't, deny that fact at all. So in the process of making this film, yes, a lot of the issues surfaced, and you have seen the film, so you must have experienced those. And Ladya is here, so later on perhaps maybe I can introduce you, and then you could talk to her directly to address some of your concerns.
Okay, yes.
Hi. My question is specifically for Yosef. I was just wondering what were the technical issues that you had, like going to a place like Afghanistan and filming on the streets? Like, what were people's reactions there? Were they curious what you were up to? And how was it when you were leaving the country with all the content that you had? Did they go through any of the footage, or was there any approval of what you were filming?
Yeah. First, I had to submit a script to the government to approve, and they rejected it. So I had to throw that out, and so the second time around, instead of writing a full script, I just wrote an outline, loosely detailing of what I intended to do, and that got greenlit. And so we received permits, but permits don't really mean anything on the streets in Kabul. Kabul is divided into districts, and each district has its police office, and you try to go into a market in Kabul and show your film permit to a police officer, and he just stares at you. So those were pretty useless. But as I said before, it was constantly trying to focus on what's important to shoot and only what's important. So whenever I was rehearsing something on the street, I didn't have my camera out and I didn't have anyone else around me. It was just me interacting with people that I placed into the environments. And often I had to climb on the roof of buildings to shoot down with a long lens, because when I was shooting down in the market, I was gathering too much attention, and that's not necessarily a security concern, but it's a concern because you're breaking the illusion when everyone starts to look into the camera and posing, because everyone in Afghanistan wants to be an actor, So it was very much an exercise in trying to blend in and remain unseen. And then transporting the material back, I was very afraid that because there's a lot of security around the airport, and you have to go through a lot of security and a lot of scanning, that perhaps everything that I had shot would get lost. So for safety, we made copies of all the footage that we left in Afghanistan in case anything got erased.
Okay, and I think we have time for just one more question. Okay, the light is back there, unfortunately. Yes, okay.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your films with us today. They were all really quite wonderful. And I just wanted to follow up actually on the actors question. We kind of got lost and we didn't get the fiction director's answers about communicating with your actors. For both of you, neither of your protagonists were like characterized by doom and gloom. And it was very interesting, so if you could just speak about that, it would be great. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure that I heard the question fully. I think you would like to revisit the actor's question who started our Q&A in asking about the specific relationships between directors and actors, is that right?
Yeah, the actor had commented on how neither of the protagonists of those films were necessarily characterized by doom and gloom and total sadness. So how the directors communicated with their actors and what kind of discussions they had, but specifically for the fiction directors.
Okay, thank you. And for the fiction directors, so the non-documentary filmmakers. Okay, who would like to start that?
That's a great question. It's a hard one to answer too. I would say with Sheila Cording, who we cast in as the woman, we really wanted to trot a delicate line between being observing and judgmental, because I think it's a really complex thing to dramatize. Someone coming to a new city and having a hard time acclimatizing without making it look judgmental too. So we really tried with her to have kind of like more of a neutral look, a look of, a look that showed that, yeah, she was having a hard time, but she was still like processing her environment too. And that was really important to us. And you don't actually see a lot of her reactions as well. So choosing those in the edit were really important, because she's kind of like a spirit that kind of wanders around Dundas Street, because you don't see her very often. You kind of see the environments that she's looking at, and then you get a few of her reactions. So just making sure that those looks and expressions were coming from more of a neutral place, but also an authentic place that really spoke to Sophia's work.
Great, thank you. Patrice?
The casting made for the parents are actor I already work with. Speak English too. Sorry, Gilling. Ça sert à quoi d'avoir un traducteur? Mais pour en fait le travail avec l'acteur qui est Théo, qui était l'adolescent. J'ai fait des auditions. Ça s'est donné que Théo, il graffait, il faisait du snowboard. Il avait déjà joué dans des films. Donc, ça a été très facile avec Théo. Je lui expliquais, écoute, là, t'es dans tel état. Puis il me le donnait. J'ai pratiquement eu à rien donner de direction supplémentaire. Ça a été très, très simple avec Théo. Mais par contre, toi, ça a dû être plus compliqué.
Yeah.
Can we hear the translation first? Thank you.
As for the casting for the parents was pretty easy. I picked my own. As for the work, the main part of the work was actually with the main actor, who was Theo, who was the teenager. So I had, he was full of options and skills I was looking for. He was a snowboarder. He was doing graffitis. He already had acted for some films as well. So what was happening is I would explain to him the kind of state I wanted, and he basically was delivering. So there was very little direction on top of that I would give to him, pretty much. So.
Thank you. Yosef?
Making this movie was, to me, a lot about trying to unlearn the things that you learn at school. Especially with dealing with actors. Coming out of school, I had a terrible kind of feeling and idea about what it was directing and working with actors and just making movies overall. But so it was just me trying to kind of go and turn that upside down and try to, instead of being pushed to be very hands-on with actors in directing, I tried to go the other way and try to be very hands-off. And then I learned about casting. You know, casting is such an important process in making a film, that once you cast the right person and once you develop the skill of being able to cast the right person, really a lot of your work is done. And really, you shouldn't be so heavily involved in directing an actor. You shouldn't be giving them confusing lines, words to use to think in their head. You know, that's just confusing crap. So really, with Farzana, who plays the character of Mina, she is not an actress. She's just a kid, 12-year-old girl that I talked to in Kabul because we knew her parents. And I cast her because more than all the other girls that I had spoken to, she embodied the characteristics that were present in the character of Mina already. Because I had 19 days to film this movie, I didn't have the time to take someone who maybe had a better look, but didn't have those characteristics and train them. I just didn't have the time to train them to be able to go out and place them in the street and for them to be able to interact with the environment in 19 days. So when I spoke to her, and she was completely different. She was very much like street children in Afghanistan. Usually girls who are, working class, middle class girls in Afghanistan are very reserved, very shy, especially when they're talking to a stranger. So when they spoke to me, they were very quiet. And then I sat down with Farzana, and immediately she was the one who was leading the conversation. She was challenging me. She was joking. She was very playful. So immediately I knew that she was like those kids on the street, because the kids on the streets in Afghanistan, they have to develop this aggression in order to be able to survive and sell. And so she had those characteristics, and I knew that in terms of casting, she was the right choice, and I could accomplish this in 19 days with her. And so after that, I pretty much stayed hands-off when I was directing, except for trying to kind of calm her down because she's a kid. So outside of action and cut, she was just, bouncing around and being a kid.
Okay, being a kid. On that note, I would like to close out now and to thank, first of all, our filmmakers. I'm sure that you join me in wishing them the fullest and the best in the work that is to come. And there's such rich potential, such wonderful futures that are sitting on this stage. And I, for one, can't wait to see what they do next. So I'll start there.
I'd like to thank Sherry for so thoughtfully putting this program together. It was really moving to see all the films. I've never seen the films by these filmmakers today, but it was really mindfully and thoughtfully put together. So thank you so much for including us on this panel.
Thank you. And very grateful thanks again to TIFF and to TIFF Higher Learning, a wonderful, wonderful organization and program that allows us to do things like this. So thank you for joining us today.